Hey everyone, welcome back. It's great to have you here today. I've got a brand new story to share, and believe me, this one feels personal. I cut ties with my wife and left her with nothing after discovering the truth. She had mocked me as a simp and became pregnant by another man. I'm 34, and she's 28. We had only been married for 7 months, following a whirlwind 2 years of dating. Our relationship started online, and after a handful of dates, we quickly became serious. One thing led to another, and before long, we were married. I've always been a bit of a nerd, so when an attractive woman showered me with affection and told me she loved me, I fell hard. I was completely smitten, and she knew exactly how to take advantage of that. Running my own small business keeps me constantly on the move, often traveling throughout the week. My income before taxes was around $175,000 a year, while she didn't work at all. She relied on me entirely for everything, her lifestyle, her needs, and her expenses. To be honest, she was never the most hardworking person, but I let it slide. I enabled it. She never lifted a finger around the house, didn't bother with cooking, and left the cleaning untouched. It should have been a red flag, but at the time, I just accepted it as part of who she was. Then, a few months into our marriage, she hit me with the news she was pregnant. Unfortunately, I was out of town for work when she told me, so I immediately dropped everything and rushed home. The next day, I took her to a clinic, and the results confirmed she was 3 months along. A week later, I had to swing by the house unexpectedly to grab something for work. The moment I pulled into the driveway, I noticed her car parked in the garage, meaning she was home. As soon as I stepped inside, I heard noises coming from the bedroom. My gut twisted, and I already had a sinking feeling about what I was about to find. The worst part? They hadn't even bothered to close the door. I walked in and saw something that confirmed my worst fears. She had the audacity to look me straight in the eye and blurt out that it wasn't what it looked like. Mind you, she was 3 months pregnant at the time. I can't even begin to describe what I felt at that moment. I had spent months preparing to be a father, building my life around her, making sure she had everything she needed. And yet, there she was, proving exactly who she really was. They both froze in shock as I turned and walked away. She scrambled after me, trying to convince me that I hadn't seen what was right in front of my face, as if I were some kind of fool. But I wasn't about to play that game. I pulled myself together just enough to grab what I had originally come for, then told her in no uncertain terms that she needed to be out of the house by the time I got back. Driving away, my mind was a complete mess. I was barely holding it together, lucky I didn't crash the car. I kept replaying everything in my head, every "I love you," every sweet word she had ever said. It had all been a lie. The only reason I never saw through it was because work kept me busy, and she had played the part flawlessly. Her plan was obvious. She wanted me to support her through the pregnancy and then raise another man's kid as my own. The betrayal ran deep. She bombarded me with calls, flooded my voicemail, but I ignored every single one. When I got to the office, I reached out to a friend, who waited a couple of hours before heading to my house. He later let me know she had packed up some essentials and left. That same evening, I went straight to Home Depot, bought new locks, and changed every single one. Not long after, I found out she had gone back to her family's place. That was all I needed to know. I wasted no time. I called my lawyer, and the divorce papers were served. My lawyer gave me one clear piece of advice: silence is power. He told me to avoid any calls from her family or friends, and, if mutual acquaintances reached out, to be polite but not discuss the divorce. Any legal matters? He would handle them himself. My lawyer's advice turned out to be spot on. I had no intention of stirring up any unnecessary drama, but keeping my distance was the smartest way to avoid any complications or potential traps. We arranged for her to collect the rest of her belongings the following weekend, strictly communicating through text. To keep things civil and prevent any confrontations, my friend handled everything on my behalf while she retrieved her things. She didn't take it well. Instead of accepting the situation gracefully, she retaliated by hiring a divorce attorney and demanding $1,800 per month in alimony for the next 6 years. Her argument? She claimed the baby was mine and insisted she needed financial support. On top of that, she expected to stay on my health insurance, which was beyond ridiculous. Despite how infuriating her demands were, I refused to react emotionally. It was a good thing my attorney received the request before I did, because he immediately shut down any ideas she had about cashing in on me. She might have thought she was entitled to certain things, but reality was about to hit her hard. While I was willing to divide whatever assets we accumulated during the marriage, my priority was cutting all ties with her as soon as possible. What I wasn't willing to do was bankroll her life for another 6 years, continue paying for her insurance, or raise a child that had absolutely nothing to do with me. That wasn't happening. She could go find support from the guy she had been sneaking around with. When I met with my attorney to strategize how to avoid getting stuck with alimony or any other financial obligations I had no interest in fulfilling, we focused on her complete lack of employment. I was making $175,000 a year before taxes, while she had never contributed financially. She had depended on me for everything. Our main objective was to eliminate the alimony entirely, and after some maneuvering, we succeeded. Still, my lawyer warned me that if we couldn't get it thrown out completely, we'd need to fight to reduce it as much as possible. He pointed out that courts often lean in favor of women, and her attorney might try twisting the narrative, painting me as an enabler who had somehow driven her to cheat. The reality was simple. I had been working this demanding job for over 2 years, and we had been together for almost a year before she betrayed me. The only slight difference back then was that I might have worked an hour or two less per week, but even then, I was still grinding 60 hours regularly. And now, 7 years later, my workload is even heavier. If I hadn't caught her, she would have continued living off me without a second thought. That's exactly why my lawyer pushed for an aggressive approach. At the time, I thought it might have been overkill, but looking back, I don't regret it. He knew what he was doing. He wasn't perfect himself, and I think that's why he understood the situation so well. He also knew that concrete proof of her infidelity would make all the difference in court. That's when he suggested hiring a private investigator. His reasoning was simple. The more evidence we had, the stronger my case would be. So, I agreed. My attorney handled the arrangements, though I paid for the investigator myself. And let me tell you, that guy was good. Actually, good doesn't even cover it. He was outstanding. If I ever found myself in a situation like this again, I'd pray he wasn't on the other side. He even did a light background check on me, not as thorough as what he did on her, but just enough to make sure there was nothing that could be used against me in court. If anything had come up, I could have been stuck paying alimony for years, possibly up to 5, or even longer if she never remarried, which isn't uncommon these days. Having a job like mine didn't exactly work in my favor either. It didn't take long for the investigator to find exactly what we needed. He managed to catch her with the same guy I had walked in on. That should have been enough, but I made a dumb mistake. I forgot to cancel one of my credit cards, which she still had access to. She went out with her boyfriend that night and blew around $6,000 in a single evening. The card didn't even have a high limit. I had originally opened it just to boost my credit score, and since I had been using cash for most of my expenses, I had completely forgotten about it. That mistake ended up costing me. A month into the investigation, things took an even darker turn. The private investigator uncovered that her cheating hadn't just started recently, it had been going on throughout our entire marriage. In fact, it had been happening even before we got married. He identified 2 other men she had been involved with before eventually cutting ties with them. The best part? Both of them were willing to provide sworn affidavits for my lawyer, confirming her infidelity. On top of that, the investigator gathered a mountain of photographic evidence, all supported by statements from her former affair partners. Looking back, I realized my relentless work schedule had played right into her hands. While I was working 60 to 80-hour weeks to provide for us, she was out there doing whatever she wanted. She had used my hard work as an opportunity to live a double life. She was meticulous in how she managed her affairs, avoiding any infidelity on the weekends when I was home. Her boyfriend was fully aware of this arrangement. Every move she made was calculated, ensuring I never suspected a thing. When the private investigator interviewed the 2 men who were frustrated enough to come forward, they were brutally honest about how she operated. They made it clear she was the one who dictated the terms. You didn't reach out to her unless she initiated contact. She controlled every aspect of the relationship to avoid getting caught. The private investigator ended up being my saving grace. He tracked down men she had previously dated, and 2 of them were angry enough to sign affidavits confirming her infidelity. They detailed how she had deliberately manipulated me and worked to keep me in the dark. Now, I'm not against alimony in cases where it makes sense, like when one spouse significantly out-earns the other, or when one has been out of the workforce for years due to the marriage. Re-entering the job market after a long gap can be tough, so in those cases, I can understand some level of financial support. But in my situation, no chance. She was the one who destroyed our marriage, and there was no way I was going to reward her betrayal by paying her to move on. The investigator gathered plenty of photographic evidence showing her spending time with different men. While not all of it was necessary for court, it helped build a clear picture of who she really was. By interviewing these men, he traced her history back to 2 individuals who felt scorned after she abruptly ended things with them. These 2 men played a crucial role in shaping the judge's decision. Not only did they confirm they had been romantically involved with her during our marriage, but one of them revealed that their relationship had started before we even got married. They also explained how she carefully managed her affairs, never calling or texting on weekends when I was home, never inviting them over, and ensuring I never reached out to her first. Everything was carefully orchestrated to keep her double life hidden. About a month after I kicked her out, the private investigator uncovered yet another disturbing detail. She had been spotted at a nightclub, spending time in a back room with around 10 men. By this point, she was 3 months pregnant. From the moment I walked in on her betrayal to the day we stepped into court, I had zero contact with her. However, my family did get some calls. She never stopped trying to reach me, and even after the divorce was finalized and she lost everything, her father decided to step in. One day, my ex-father-in-law called me, furious, blaming me for ruining his daughter's life. I let him get it all out, not bothering to argue. When he was done, I calmly offered to have my attorney send him a copy of the private investigator's findings. She had spun her own version of events, painting me as the cheater and even going so far as to claim she had caught me in bed with one of her friends. It was laughable. Surprisingly, he agreed to see the report. My lawyer removed the names of the men involved for privacy, then sent it over. About 2 weeks later, my ex-father-in-law called back, sounding like a different person. He apologized for yelling at me, and from that moment on, I never heard from her family again. Looking back, it was the private investigator who truly brought everything to light, while my attorney masterfully structured the case. My lawyer had warned me from the start that courts often favor women, especially when a child is involved, even if the child isn't biologically related. I was fortunate to avoid getting dragged into a more complicated battle. But my attorney also made it clear that we had to provide undeniable proof that she was the sole reason for the divorce if I wanted to eliminate my financial obligations. Thanks to the investigator and the people she had burned along the way, we managed to do exactly that. I still like to joke about lawyers, but I'll be the first to admit, when you find a good one, they're worth every single penny. And as for private investigators, I'll never underestimate the good ones again. The information he uncovered went far beyond what I ever expected. When it came to the money she wasted on my credit cards, I decided not to bother pursuing reimbursement. At the time, I was earning a solid income, $175,000 before taxes, and since then, it's grown to around $240,000. The way I saw it, the charges she racked up were a costly mistake on my part for not canceling those cards sooner. Legally, the debt was mine, and trying to squeeze money out of her would have been a waste of time. At the end of the day, I just wanted it all behind me. That's why I let her take her personal belongings, most of the things we bought together, and even the gifts I had given her. I didn't want any reminders of our marriage in my house. I wanted a clean break. No strings, no lingering drama, just a fresh start. The one thing I absolutely refused to do was pay her $1,800 a month for the next 6 years, which, according to my attorney, was the most likely outcome. On top of that, I wanted zero involvement with her unborn child. Paying alimony to a woman who had deceived me would have felt like rewarding her for her betrayal, essentially financing the lifestyle she had built on lies. There was no way I was going to be a part of that. As for the other costs, I was willing to shoulder them if it meant closing this chapter of my life as quickly as possible. I had no doubt she was playing some kind of game, but if paying my legal fees was the price of ensuring a clean break, so be it. Back then, in California, the divorce process took exactly 7 months and 1 day to finalize. These days, if there's no contest, it can be over in as little as 7 weeks. Surprisingly, the divorce took more of an emotional toll on me than I expected. I don't bring this up for sympathy, rather, I share my story in the hope that someone else might learn from it, maybe even recognize red flags that I had been too blind to see. I still analyze everything, wondering if there were subtle clues I missed along the way. Hindsight has a cruel way of showing you just how obvious things were. At the time, I wanted to avoid a prolonged legal battle, so I focused on resolving everything quickly. In total, my attorney's fees amounted to roughly $100,000. But in the long run, it saved me a fortune. If the judge had ruled in her favor, I could have been stuck making those payments for 6 years or even longer. In the end, once the judge heard all the details of the case, she walked away with nothing. No alimony. No financial support. Nothing. Since the divorce, I haven't seen her, but I do know that she's in Arizona. I found out when she tried applying for credit in my name 5 times. I have no idea if she decided to go through with the pregnancy, but I'm certain the child wasn't mine. More than likely, she had planned to trap me into raising someone else's baby. I can admit that I was manipulated. I was a willing participant in my own deception, and I take full responsibility for the role I played in letting it happen. But she has to live with the consequences of her actions every single day. Whether she ever acknowledges it or not, she lost something good, and that's entirely on her. Meanwhile, I kept moving forward. My business continued to grow, my income increased, and my life improved. As for whether she still keeps in touch with any of our old mutual friends, I don't know, and I don't care enough to find out. Did she hurt me? Absolutely. Did she try to take advantage of me financially as some sort of twisted compensation? Without a doubt. But she failed. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters. People have asked why I didn't react differently when I caught her in our bed with another man. Why I didn't fight. Why I didn't make a scene. Why I just walked away. And believe me, I considered it. The rage I felt in that moment could have pushed things in a very different direction. But walking away was the smartest thing I could have done. If I had let my emotions take over, it could have escalated into something far worse. I could have made a mistake that changed the course of my life forever. Instead, I walked out, took control of the situation legally, and ensured she got what she deserved, nothing. The more I reflect on it, the more I realize that she never truly loved me. I was a stepping stone, a source of financial security, nothing more. And I made it easy for her. I was barely home during the week, exhausted when I did come back, and too trusting to ever question her. She knew my schedule inside and out, which gave her plenty of time to do whatever she wanted, as long as she made sure to be home before me. I was played, plain and simple. But at least I learned from it. And if there's one silver lining in all of this, it's that the STD test I took 2 days after catching her came back negative. Small victories, I guess. Now, for the question some of you might be wondering about the child. I won't lie, this part still gets to me. She was planning to pass the baby off as mine. But I never signed the birth certificate, and after the divorce, I didn't even bother demanding a DNA test. I didn't need one. The truth came out soon enough. When the baby was born, it was Asian. I can't say I was shocked. She, however, had a whole elaborate story ready to go. According to her, the child had Asian heritage because of some distant relative on her grandmother's side. But let's be real, she had been sleeping around so much that there was no telling who the actual father was. It was a mess, but thankfully, not my mess. I dodged a bullet by getting out when I did. I wasn't on the hook for child support, and I wasn't trapped in a life I never signed up for. Looking back, I have no regrets about how I handled it. I walked away from that disaster with my dignity, my finances intact, and a valuable lesson learned. And honestly, that's more than I could have asked for. As for the baby, I later heard through the grapevine that she ended up giving it up for adoption. It's a sad situation, no matter how you look at it. I can't even begin to imagine what that child will go through when they eventually learn the truth about their biological mother's choices. But as for me, I've moved on, and I'm doing just fine. Alright, that was one wild story. Now let's jump into another. Buckle up, because this one is just as unbelievable. My wife and I were just 7 weeks away from celebrating our 25th wedding anniversary when I discovered she had been having a multi-year affair with a 35-year-old bartender from New York City. For the sake of this story, I'll call my soon-to-be ex-wife Lauren. She's 49, I'm 50, and we have one son, who's now 25. Up until the moment my world came crashing down, I genuinely believed we had a great marriage. Lauren wasn't just my wife, she was my best friend, the one person I trusted with my life. We got along incredibly well, never had any major fights, and always managed to resolve our minor disagreements without letting them linger. Our relationship wasn't just built on companionship, it was passionate, too. We were both adventurous and shared an equally strong libido. To keep things exciting, we regularly went on dates, took romantic vacations, and never let intimacy become routine. We weren't afraid to mix things up, sometimes even sneaking in moments of passion in less conventional places, whether it was in the car, outdoors, or anywhere we could steal a private moment together. Some might call that immature, but for us, it was a reflection of how much we truly enjoyed each other's company. I was happy. I thought she was happy too. So, how did I find out about the affair? Did I stumble upon some flirty text messages? A suspicious email? Did I catch them red-handed? No, none of the above. The truth came to me in the most unexpected way, through the ex-girlfriend of Lauren's lover. I'll call her Jessica. Jessica reached out to me out of nowhere, sending me a message on LinkedIn of all places. She asked if we could talk, and at first, I thought it was some kind of prank, or worse, a setup Lauren had somehow orchestrated. But when I got on the phone with Jessica, my entire world collapsed. She didn't just tell me about the affair. She showed me a series of photos, a video. Lauren, caught in the act with another man. The moment I saw those images, I knew there was no coming back from this. The betrayal hit me harder than anything before. And no matter how much time passes, I doubt I'll ever be able to erase those images from my mind. Forgiveness? Impossible. In my eyes, Lauren had committed the ultimate betrayal. Our marriage was shattered beyond repair. Now, let me give you some background on how this all happened. Lauren works for a company with a corporate office in New York City. A couple of times a year, she's required to travel there for work meetings. These meetings are usually scheduled early in the week, so her routine has been the same for years: fly out on Sunday afternoon, attend meetings on Monday and Tuesday, then return home Tuesday night. Every time she traveled, she stayed at a hotel near her office. And that is where she met him, her bartender lover, a guy 15 years younger than her. According to Jessica, Lauren and this bartender hit it off immediately. One thing led to another, and before the night was over, they hooked up in her hotel room. That was a year ago. After that, their rendezvous continued, twice a year, for 2 more years. According to Jessica, the affair officially ended last year. Now, if you ask Lauren's lover, he insists that their affair wasn't all that serious. He told Jessica they were only together 4 times, and every single time was on a Sunday night in Lauren's hotel room. He also swore that they never kissed, and that he always used protection. I find that very hard to believe. Jessica only discovered the affair 5 months after it ended. She found explicit messages and photos on his old phone, and when she confronted him, he didn't even bother denying it. He admitted everything. That's when Jessica kicked him to the curb, forcing him to leave Manhattan because he couldn't afford to live there on his own. He ended up moving back to Long Island and quitting his bartending job altogether. Naturally, I had one big question for Jessica. Why did she wait so long to tell me? She admitted that she hadn't originally planned to tell me. The only reason she finally did was because of her new boyfriend, a man who had been cheated on himself and absolutely despised infidelity. He pushed her to come clean, insisting that I deserved to know the truth. That was the only reason she reached out. I asked her if she knew why Lauren had ended the affair. According to Jessica, Lauren had supposedly called things off because she realized she still loved me. That revelation didn't bring me any comfort. If anything, it only made things more confusing. After absorbing everything, I took some time to grieve, to process, to figure out what came next. And after careful consideration, I made my decision. I was going to divorce Lauren. As much as I still loved her, trust was something I could never rebuild. Every time I looked at her, I would see her with him. The memories of those images Jessica sent me would never fade. That kind of betrayal isn't something you come back from. But I wasn't going to give Lauren the chance to explain herself. I had no interest in hearing her justifications, her apologies, or whatever excuses she had prepared. No, I wanted her to feel what I had felt. So I decided I'd blindside her with divorce papers. The moment she received them, I wanted her world to collapse, just like mine had. That would be my revenge. Until then, I would act completely normal, kind, even. She wouldn't see it coming. My story is proof that this can happen to anyone. After nearly 27 years of marriage, I never imagined I'd be the one sharing my experience like this. But here I am. If there's one thing I want other men to take away from this, it's this. Never get complacent. Stay aware. Don't assume that just because everything feels right, it actually is. Once the divorce papers were drawn up, I put my plan into motion. I moved all of my belongings into storage, making sure everything was taken care of in the morning. In the afternoon, a courier delivered the divorce papers directly to Lauren's office. Then I waited. Just as expected, she lost it. She called me immediately. I answered. Before she could say much, I cut straight to the point. I told her I knew everything. I knew about her affair with the bartender, her little boy toy, and that I had already filed for divorce. She begged me to let her explain, but I wasn't interested. I told her I had already moved out, suggested she get herself a lawyer, and then I hung up. That's when the real chaos began. She kept calling, over and over. Each time she did, I sent her one of the explicit pictures Jessica had given me. When she called again, I sent another, and another. By then, everything was going exactly as I had planned. That evening, I called my son to tell him the truth. Understandably, he was shocked and upset. He asked me if there was any chance I'd reconsider and try to work things out. I told him flat out, no, not after what she did. Then I told him something every man should live by. Never stay with a cheater. After we hung up, I was about to call my parents when my mom's number popped up on my screen. When I answered, her words hit me like a brick. Lauren had just left their house. Apparently, she had shown up in a panic, desperate to find me. While she was there, she spilled everything, admitted to the affair, told them how I had just served her with divorce papers, and then hit them with something I hadn't seen coming. She claimed she had been going to therapy ever since ending the affair last year. She told them she had been diagnosed with a sex addiction. She insisted that her cheating wasn't a reflection of how she felt about me, but rather, a compulsion, a mental struggle that made it nearly impossible for her to resist temptation. Can you believe that? After hearing all of this, I drove straight to my parents' house. I was expecting their full support. Instead, I got the exact opposite. To my frustration, they both tried to convince me to reconsider the divorce. They weren't excusing her actions, but they pointed out that she had supposedly ended the affair on her own and had sought help. My mom, in particular, was pushing hard for me to reconsider, while my dad tried taking a softer approach. I was stunned, angry, disappointed. I told them exactly how I felt. No one should ever stay in a relationship with a cheater. Period. I couldn't believe they were even entertaining the idea that I should give Lauren another chance. I made it clear that calling her infidelity and addiction was nothing more than an excuse, an attempt to shift the blame away from her choices. In my eyes, when you do something wrong, you have to own the consequences. And in marriage, the ultimate consequence of betrayal is divorce. That was the path I was taking, no matter what. Before I left, my parents reassured me that they would support whatever decision I made, but they urged me to take some more time to reflect. I told them I already had, then I walked out. Later that evening, after returning to the apartment I had rented, I decided to call Lauren's father. I wanted to inform him personally of my intentions before he heard it from someone else. As soon as he picked up, he told me Lauren had just been there. She had confessed everything to him, just like she had with my parents. He didn't buy into the whole sex addiction excuse either, but he still suggested that I take some time before making a final decision. We had a long conversation, and while I didn't make any promises, I agreed to at least consider his words. Divorcing Lauren wouldn't just mean cutting ties with her. It would also mean losing her parents, who I had always been close to. That part weighed on me more than I expected. That night, Lauren called me repeatedly, but I let every call go unanswered. The next morning, my son called. He told me that Lauren had reached out to him the night before and finally admitted everything. I had to give her credit for that. At least she wasn't trying to hide from the truth anymore. She had taken full responsibility for her actions and confessed to our entire family. But that didn't change the reality of what she had done. My son made it clear that he was disgusted by her actions and fully supported me in whatever decision I made. He also warned me that I'd likely face pressure from my parents and in-laws to reconsider, but he assured me that he wouldn't be part of that. Then he said something that stuck with me. If his girlfriend ever did something like this to him, he would leave her immediately. No second chances. And that's where I was, stuck in a holding pattern, trying to navigate the best way forward. My gut told me to push forward with the divorce as quickly as possible, but I also knew that moving too fast might make me look like the bad guy in the eyes of our family. Second update. I've read through all of your comments, and I genuinely appreciate the advice, even from those I don't necessarily agree with. To be clear, I'm still going through with the divorce. That decision hasn't changed, but I've decided to meet with Lauren one last time, just to give her the opportunity to say her piece. I'll allow her exactly 60 minutes to talk. No more. My attorney strongly advised against this meeting, but if I insist on going through with it, he suggested that it should either take place in his office or in a neutral location with witnesses, and everything must be recorded. He warned me to be extremely careful because he's seen these kinds of meetings go sideways. Too often, the betrayed spouse walks in expecting closure and walks out manipulated into questioning their own decision. We settled on holding the meeting at her parents' house next Tuesday. My son will be there with a tripod-mounted camera to record everything. He, along with Lauren's parents and my mom, will wait in the adjacent room. Unfortunately, my dad won't be able to make it due to a doctor's appointment. To be honest, the only reason I'm even agreeing to this meeting is to satisfy the expectations of our families. I'll post an update after it's done. Third update. We had the meeting. It went better than expected, but that didn't make it any easier. I let her speak without interruption, with only one request, that she not try to use the sex addiction excuse. She agreed. She started by telling me that she still loved me and that she missed me. She admitted that what she did was wrong, selfish, and meaningless. When she finally paused, she looked at me, waiting for a reaction. I simply nodded and said, okay. Then I gave her a look that said, is there more? She took a deep breath and continued. According to her, she had a moment of clarity last year after carrying on the affair for 2 years. That's when she realized she had to put a stop to it and seek help. She had been in therapy ever since, but never told me because she was terrified of losing me. She went on about how therapy had helped her work through the underlying issues that led her to cheat. I wasn't moved. I asked her if her therapist considered this a permanent fix. She hesitated before admitting that no, it was considered an ongoing process. That's when I hit her with a question she clearly wasn't expecting. So what happens if another young bartender walks into your life? She just stared at me. Tears welled up in her eyes. I didn't let the silence drag on. I reminded her that time was ticking, signaling for her to continue. She tried shifting the conversation, asking if I had been happy in our marriage. She wanted to know if there was anything more she could have done for me. I told her that before the affair, I had been content. But there were two critical things that had been lacking: trustworthiness and loyalty. That's when she insisted that she had always been loyal, that she had only ever loved me. I shot her a skeptical look and then burst out laughing, right in her face. She tried scrambling for justification, but nothing she said landed well. She claimed that since she only cheated when she was away, she never truly neglected me, as if that somehow made it less of a betrayal. Then, she went even further. She actually had the audacity to argue that because there was no kissing and they used protection, it wasn't that bad. She seemed to think I'd be impressed by this logic. I stared at her in disbelief before cutting her off. Do you even hear yourself right now? I asked. She sounded insane. She quickly clarified that she wasn't trying to excuse her actions, only to explain her thought process. So, I asked the one question that had been on my mind from the start. If you were supposedly happy with our marriage, then why do it? She hesitated before admitting the truth. She got caught up in the thrill of a younger, attractive man finding her desirable. Even though I had always made her feel beautiful, she convinced herself that she was losing her attractiveness and wanted proof that she still had it. At that point, we had hit the 40-minute mark, and I reminded her that she only had 20 minutes left to plead her case. That's when she made her final desperate attempt. She proposed reconciliation. She claimed that if I just gave her another chance, we could restore our marriage to what it once was. I didn't even need to think about my response. That's impossible. I told her there was no way I could ever trust her again. And more than that, every time I looked at her, I would see her with her boy toy. The image would never leave my mind. That's when she really got desperate. She suggested a one-sided open relationship. Her idea? I could do whatever I wanted with whoever I wanted, and she would remain faithful to me. I shut that down immediately. I told her I wasn't her, and I wasn't interested in playing her kind of game. And that's when the tears started. For the rest of our time, she sat there crying, pleading for me to take her back. I didn't say a word. I just let her cry. When the hour was up, I got up, grabbed my son's phone from the tripod, and walked out. Before leaving, I had my son upload the video to Dropbox, ensuring I had a copy. And then, I left. Later that night, Lauren sent me a text message, thanking me for meeting with her. I didn't respond. With that chapter closed, I was ready to move forward. First thing in the morning, I was calling my attorney and telling him to expedite the divorce. Final update. Last Wednesday, our divorce was officially finalized. We split everything equally, and Lauren decided to stay in the family home, buying out my share of the equity. Why? Because she still believes there's a chance we'll reunite and live together again someday. The entire divorce process was emotionally exhausting. There were moments when my resolve wavered. I actually considered reconciling with her more than once. But deep down, I knew that if I went back, I'd only be signing up for a lifetime of misery. Unfortunately, things didn't go as smoothly as I had hoped. During the initial hearing, the judge mandated that Lauren and I complete 60 days of marital counseling before she would proceed with the case. 60 days. I immediately questioned my attorney about this. Could she even do that? His response? Yes. The judge had the authority to impose this requirement, and there wasn't much we could do to fight it. He warned me that challenging it might actually backfire, making me look uncooperative in the judge's eyes. So, I endured the process. 20 counseling sessions. For me, it was excruciating, a complete waste of time. But I got through it. And in the end, Lauren could have dragged the divorce out longer and made it far more expensive, but she didn't. And for that, I was grateful. In fact, I appreciated it so much that, the day after our divorce was finalized, I actually took her out to dinner. Then, we went back to her house for a nightcap. And, well, you can probably guess what happened next. For the first time in over a year, we spent some time alone together. And you know what? It was good. It left me feeling content. I know some of you might be wondering, how does that even make sense? For me, it's simple. I couldn't stay married to her. I couldn't see myself ever living with her again. But that didn't mean I didn't still want her physically. Because I did. And honestly, I probably always will. We both acknowledged that whatever relationship we had moving forward would be purely physical, not unlike what she had with the bartender. She told me she could accept that for now, but she wanted more. She promised she would keep trying to win me back. Meanwhile, I haven't started actively dating yet, but I plan to. And Lauren is fully aware of that. I made it clear, if I ever meet someone serious, our arrangement ends. She understood but didn't want to think about it. She told me she would remain monogamous with me, even if I found someone else. Honestly, I do miss what we used to have. But I can appreciate what we have now. For the first time in a long time, I feel good about myself. I feel good about my future. And that's what matters.